Hello, my name is James Lembke, and I'm going to be presenting on consistent and secure network updates made practical. This is joint work with Srivatsan Ravi, Pierre-Louis Roman, and Patrick Eugster. We consider a network model defined as a typical software-defined network in which data is forwarded through the data plane by switches as a result of a match and flow table entries set on those switches. For unroutable packets or as a result of detection of link failure, network events can be generated by the data plane and forwarded to the control plane, where the controller platform, using network policies set by a system administrator, determines proper network updates that may be made to modify a switch's flow table entry. This brings about some unique challenges. First, consistency. Network updates sent to switches by the control plane are done so asynchronously, and as a result, it is important to prevent a mixture of network policies, as well as avoid loops, black holes, over-provisioning of data plane resources as a result of asynchronous updates being made to multiple switches. Second, security. A controller may become faulty or malicious, and it is important that an update sent from the control plane is only applied to a switch from a trusted controller. And lastly, practicality. Any modification to a network update protocol must be backwards compatible with existing protocols. Second, it is important to be able to establish a set of network updates on a large network, potentially spanning multiple geographic locations. And finally, minimal overhead to both switches as well as controllers themselves. This brings about Cicero. In its simplest form is a replicated control plane, where controllers themselves are replicates of each other and programmed by a system administrator as if they were a single controller. Events generated by the data plane are broadcast to the control plane. The control plane enforces a total ordering of network events through the use of an agreement protocol to ensure controller consistency. Each controller independently processes these events by looking at network policies to determine updates and sends the updates to the appropriate switch or switches in the data plane. Switches then use quorum authentication to ensure that updates themselves are applied only when received from a trusted set of controllers. An extension to Cicero involves multiple domains, where the data plane itself is divided into smaller subgroups, and each with its own independent control plane and its own settable policies. Events generated completely within the domain are forwarded only to the switch's local control plane, and network updates are processed and sent to those switches. Cicero ensures consistency through ordered updates. Due to the asynchronicity of network updates themselves cannot always be issued to all switches in parallel. As a result, an ordering needs to be established of such updates, and controllers need to be able to determine this before sending these updates to the switches themselves. Furthermore, the protocol itself needs a mechanism to ensure and enforce that these updates are applied in a proper order. To this end, Cicero makes use of an update scheduler. The update scheduler's job is to, through using network policies, determine a proper ordering of network updates by establishing dependencies among network updates themselves. These updates are sent by the control plane to the data plane in the proper order once dependencies are met, and are enforced ordering through the use of explicit acknowledgements. Security is enforced via event and update authentication. Switches, prior to sending events to the control plane, sign them with a private key. The control members themselves are given the public keys for all switches and verify that events are sent from the actual data plane itself. Updates sent to switches are enforced through the use of threshold signatures. There's a single public key that's generated for the entire control plane. Controllers themselves are given a share of the private key in such a way that no single controller can generate a valid private signature for the entire group. Controllers then assign each of their updates with their share. Switches receiving these updates aggregate all the shares together to create a signature for the entire update. It then verifies this signature via the control plane's public key. The uniqueness of using threshold signatures in this way allows for dynamic control plane membership. As control members come and go, new shares can be generated for the control plane using distributed key generation in such a way that the public key for the entire control plane group doesn't change. And finally, Cicero ensures practicality by explaining parallelism in two forms. First, update parallelism. The update scheduler is used by the control plane to determine dependencies amongst individual updates. But those updates that are determined to be independent of each other can be sent to the data plane in parallel. In this example, the red flow and the green flow are totally independent, and so updates to either of them as determined by the update scheduler can be sent completely in parallel. And second, domain parallelism. Cicero uses multiple domains to divide the data plane into subgroups, each with its own control plane. Events generated independently inside those subdomains can be processed by the control plane and updated in parallel. Events that require updates across domains, we make use of cross-domain forwarding, where the control plane of one domain forwards the event to the other domain for processing. The evaluation of Cicero consists of an environment created at Debtor Lab. We used a rack and switch topology based on pods in the social media data center, which is depicted here. We also evaluated Cicero across data center as well. And in such a case, each data center was represented by its own domain in the Cicero multi-domain environment. For workloads, we used web server and Hadoop traffic generated from a social media data center's information. These two graphs show the result for Hadoop workloads for flow completion rate. We evaluated a centralized control plane along with a crash-tolerant control plane, which uses agreement for event total ordering, but does not enforce quorum authentication, with Cicero, as well as Cicero AG. In Cicero, switches themselves use collect network updates and aggregate signatures to determine a quorum authentication. In Cicero AG, a controller is used to collect updates and aggregate the signature before sending the final signature to switches. In this case, we put less CPU and memory load on the switches themselves with the price of increased latency. In the amortized graph, flows are set up initially and are not removed after the flow is completed. This essentially amortizes the updates from the network updates, and we see that all the results are fairly similar. In the unamortized flow results, in this case, as flows completed, the rules were removed from the data plane, and as a result, if flows were to come back around again, this requires that setup to happen at every single flow addition. And so as a result, we see that there's additional latency for all of the Cicero and crash-tolerant results. In a multi-domain environment, we took multiple data centers and divided them up into different domains and evaluated Cicero multi-domain, Cicero AG, again with controller aggregation, and the centralized controller option. And again, here we see that the network, here we see the improvements on the use of domain parallelism over the single centralized controller, especially in the realm of flows that happen across domains. And finally, for control plane size, we see the increased latency when we increase the control plane, and this is specifically because of the additional messaging that happens as part of the agreement protocol and the additional updates that need to be aggregated as a result of the potentially increased quorum size. So again, it's a direct trade-off between fault tolerance and latency, and for a typical environment which requires up to 99% uptime, using a control plane of 4 or 5 is typically acceptable. So Cicero performs practical network updates using consistency through an update scheduler, security through threshold signatures and quorum authentication, and ensures practicality by exploiting as much parallelism as possible through independent updates and multiple domains. For future work, we're currently investigating additional workloads, topology discovery, additional telecom workloads, and we'll be experimenting with larger topologies. Thank you.